With all the hoo-ha going on between China and Taiwan, you might assume that Taiwan's history has its roots all the way back to China and that they share a very long history going back thousands of years, but that's simply not true.
Taiwan, for 6,000 years, was a place only with indigenous tribes.
In fact, modern-day Taiwan was more or less the result of a colonial power. Nope, it was not the Brits, neither was it the French, but another tiny little country of the Netherlands.
The Netherlands, or the Dutch, were known as the VOC back then.
They saw Taiwan as an easy target. Taiwan was not under the control of any centralized government, especially in the southern plains near modern-day Tainan. There was also a lot of infighting between each tribe. The biggest and strongest tribe at the time was the Matao or Mato tribe. The rest feared them and desperately tried to gain power through a Dutch alliance. The Dutch were stronger with guns and more sophisticated weapons. It was a no-brainer to rely on the Dutch at that point in time. The Dutch, however, just as with many European colonial powers in that time, just wanted to divide and conquer. And so they saw this as an opportunity to split apart the tribal union. As with all colonial powers in the 16th century, the Dutch started manipulating the tribes through religious conversion. Robert Junius was a church missionary who doubled as a spy for the Dutch command. He exposed planned uprisings and had many suspicious natives arrested. He reported to the Dutch headquarters that the indigenous needed to be chastised, as though they were kind of like little children.
However, the Dutch needed to defeat the Matao to continue with this plan.
For this, the Dutch played a long waiting game. They decided to prepare and strike when the Matao was at their weakest. The day finally came when two of the surrounding tribes, the Sulang and Sinkan, teamed up against the Matao. The Dutch, upon hearing this fabulous news, immediately sent troops to Taiwan. This same period, the smallpox epidemic grew rampant and wiped out many of Matao's remaining soldiers. This fight depleted the tribal powers and it was too late. Eventually, all of them surrendered to the Dutch. What's worse is that this entire time, the Spanish were doing the exact same thing on the other side of Taiwan, up north. Eventually, the Dutch defeated them, and this meant that Taiwan was now fully under the Dutch. Despite surrendering, the Dutch wanted revenge for losing soldiers in Taiwan and continued with the plan of chastising the indigenous. They burned almost all of the indigenous villages and imprisoned anyone who was against the VOC. Robert Junius was, unsurprisingly, pretty excited about this.
How well it has been that Matao were burned for the evil committed against us.
Dutch became exceedingly hungry for blood, with one of the incidents happening in Lamay Island. The Dutch chased the island's tribe into a cave and trapped them by surrounding and blocking all entrances. They left small holes where toxic sulfur and resin was burnt. For 8 days, fumes filled up the entire cave, and those suffering inside could be heard crying. On the 8th day, when soldiers entered to investigate, they found bodies of around 300, including women and children, lifeless. All of them died from suffocating. Indigenous were hoping for a way out, and they couldn't get rid of the Dutch themselves. In 1661, an unforeseen large fleet of vessels landed ashore. 4,000 troops landed and attacked Dutch forces. Was this salvation? Freedom at last? At least, that's what the indigenous would like to believe. You see, these people came across the Strait of Taiwan from a neighboring country in distress. In China, the Ming dynasty fell and was overtaken by the Qing. A general named Koxinga hated the new Qing dynasty. He would rather die than see the Ming dynasty end. And since the Ming dynasty couldn't continue in China, he must have thought, why not make Taiwan the new Ming dynasty? And so he did. A year later, he defeated the Dutch, and Taiwan became the de facto Ming dynasty. Koxinga brought with him about 100,000 Chinese immigrants, This was already enough to overpower the indigenous population. Under Koxinga, Taiwan was already no longer an indigenous majority. With the Qing dynasty fully in control of mainland China, they wouldn't care about Taiwan, right?
You want to explain to me what you're doing here?
I came looking for booty. I came looking for man's butt.
A man's butt? Excuse me?
Oh, I know who you are, Chris Hansen. But see, I calls you Chris Handsome. I watch your TV show all the time. So you can go ahead and bring them cameras and them police is waiting outside. It don't make me no difference. Now, I tell you what. I like you, and I want you. Now, we can do this the easy way, or we can do it the hard way. The choice is yours.
Well, I don't think you and I will be doing anything any kind of way.
Okay, I see you choosing the hard way.
Okay, cut. This isn't working. Someone get this guy out.
Don't make me ruin that bike. No, Chris, I'm a warrior.
Because it was in Ming. It wasn't an indigenous kingdom anymore. It was another Han Chinese kingdom. The Qing dynasty felt threatened. And unsurprisingly, they invaded and conquered Taiwan yet again. The Qing ruled Taiwan for about 200 years, the longest period of all. And within that 200 years, the Chinese population grew by 25 times. Remember that Koxinga already turned Taiwan into Chinese majority. So imagine multiplying that Chinese population by another 25 times. But why did the Qing stay for so long? And why did so many Chinese people move to Taiwan? They saw Taiwan as very valuable for economic gain. Taiwan was already part of the global trade network. And for that reason, the Qing flooded Taiwan with so much Chinese migrants that it was unrecognizable by the end of the Qing dynasty. And it's thanks to the Qing dynasty bringing in so much Chinese people that today we are struggling to answer the question, does Taiwan belong to China? And through that 200-year process, the indigenous had to endure, day by day, year by year, their country being stripped away. Some tribes gave up, but some decided to fight. One particular tribe named the Taukas decided to fight back and start a revolution. But they ended up losing the fight. And once again, those who joined the fight against the Qing had their village and homes entirely burnt up. Some survivors were brought in to be tortured, beaten, or even killed. First the Dutch, then Koxinga, and now the Qing. At the turn of the 19th century, the Chinese surrendered Taiwan to Japan. China and Japan fought over who could colonize Korea, and the Japanese were industrializing very fast and were seen as far stronger than the Chinese. China didn't want to risk an all-out war, so they made a deal to negotiate for peace. But Japan not only wanted Korea, they wanted a piece of Taiwan. Now Taiwan's occupied for the 4th time. The Japanese saw the indigenous as barbarians, as inferior to the Chinese. Most of the indigenous territory at this point in time was within the mountains, and it was hard for Japan to administer. And despite all that, they took the effort to actually put landmines and electric fences to prevent the aborigines from ever entering Japanese territory. It was pretty clear at that time that the indigenous were seen like wild animals to stay away from, to be left alone, completely separate from Japanese culture. There were even race cards, postcards of indigenous people showing how they typically look like. And to be honest, I'm not very sure of how to describe this. But the main point is that they were seen almost like animals, like specimens to be studied. Don't just take my word for it. A Japanese bureaucrat named Mochiji had this to say about them, that they resembled animals. It was common for certain tribes people to have tattoos on their face, and yet because it was against Japanese norms at that point in time, they were forced to remove those tattoos. And let's not forget, they did not have the present-day technology that allows for easy removal of tattoos, so they had their faces disfigured.
There were even gruesome massacres conducted by the Japanese. The blurry part of this image is a neatly arranged bunch of human heads.
Under the KMT, or Kuo Min Tang, which was the government of Taiwan that took over after Japan surrendered, Indigenous were labelled as mountain compatriots because that was how they survived colonialism. This whole time, the Indigenous were hiding in the mountains, finding every corner, any cave, any valley that they could hide so as not to die.
And once again, another new leader of Taiwan had plans for these mountain compatriots.
The Taiwanese government introduced a policy of mountain flattening. From the east to the west, it was supposedly aimed at connecting Taiwan's major cities and towns. Highways, reservoirs, dams, these were symbols of progress, national unity, and economic growth. Yet, beneath the veneer of development lies a dark reality. These projects invaded the already scarce indigenous land. In 2010, an article written by Scott Simon highlighted just how insidious the Taiwanese government was until recently. Asia Cement was caught with signature forgeries on documents about giving away indigenous land for corporate use. An indigenous named Igong Shiban found out about this and tried to bring the matter to the government. Asia Cement then sent people to physically attack her and her husband. And her husband was burned on the leg twice. Still, once wasn't enough. Gradually over the years, more and more indigenous people got threatened out of their lands. And with nowhere else to go, almost all of them disappeared into the cities. Without a real community, without a place to call home, and with no more mountains to run away to, indigenous people's presence faded away. The mountains represented the very last place untouched by foreigners. And even this, they could not keep. Can you imagine how crazy this is? 400 years. So many world-changing events happened. The Industrial Revolution, world wars, technology boom, and the indigenous who once roamed the lands for 6,000 years couldn't even keep their refuge in the mountains. This is too much. With the looming threat of a Chinese invasion, Taiwan's desperate to redefine its stereotype that it is a country of Han Chinese immigrants. What's their latest solution to finally recognize the indigenous history? It took the threat of an invasion from China to finally pressure the president to come out and apologize.
我要代表政府向全体原住民族致上我们最深的歉意。对于过去400年来各位承受的苦痛和不公平的待遇，我代表政府向各位道歉。
I believe there's nothing wrong in redefining what a nation is. After all, what makes a country sovereign goes beyond ethnicity. But something about this feels disingenuous. The indigenous have always been treated as subhuman. And now to suddenly create a Taiwanese identity around that very same people group, it's all very opportunistic.
After hearing what I've said, one might wonder whether Taiwan actually cares. To find out, I came to a place that appears to celebrate indigenous heritage. Sun Moon Lake in Taiwan's Nantou County is the country's largest lake. Known for its scenic beauty and distinctive sun and moon shape, this place was once home to the indigenous Tao people. Today it stands as a major tourist hotspot where visitors flock to experience its tranquil waters and partake in annual events like the swimming carnival.
下船的时候、上船的时候要特别的小心，不要一边玩手机看手机，因为昨天掉了一个下去，到现在还没上来啊！我求求您，921大地震，这座岛屿震垮， 生效了，已经还给少族人，改名拉鲁岛。拉鲁是少族的母语，中间有大树的地方，那里才是真正的岛屿。旁边呢，只是人造的福田，还有当时的面积，有现在的6倍大，统统被大地震给它震掉了。
The Taiwanese government has positioned Sun Moon Lake as a symbol of their efforts to honor and support the indigenous communities. By using the lake as a stage to showcase their commitment, they decided to build an entire indigenous cultural village. But just how good is it? Well, what first impressed me was the size. This place is huge.
Well, that's a rather interesting sculpture. You need probably a full day just over here, and my god, there's way too many things to do.
And yet, despite having many things to do around here, I haven't actually gotten anything interesting. And I realized that this was just an amusement park and nothing more. Half the place were just entertainment rides, and the other half, a bunch of statues with signboards saying this is how their village looked like in the past. And honestly, I learned nothing about the real history of the indigenous there. All I know was how their homes look, how they dress, but these things I can just Google. Okay, there were some performances about tribal dances and rituals, but that's it. It's fair to say that for the indigenous, this cultural village feels like nothing but an empty gesture. But that's no reason not to come, because there is the president's fish. For just 900 Taiwanese dollars, you get the best delicious fish that the president has eaten on their visit here. So I was not entirely disappointed. At least I went home with a happy stomach. Or I mean, I went back to the hotel with a happy stomach. They had saffron and they had giant garlic chops. I mean, could I really complain?
Just be careful when you're eating one of these, because the bones are pretty sharp and can really stab you. They pricked my tongue a few times. Well, more like pierce right through it.
Yeah, these things weren't that easy to chew on. Even this fish is trying to make me forget about the place as soon as I can.
It seems that even today, the indigenous do not feel as though they are taken seriously. Recently in 2023, another article came out titled "The Inconvenient Truth of Taiwan's First Peoples." In it says, an indigenous schoolgirl was teased when her class was taught that indigenous women served as prostitutes for the Japanese during the Japanese occupation. Classmates asked her if she rode a pig to school. And on the topic of education, the indigenous are far behind their Chinese counterparts.
Ethnic Han.
Recent research paper showed that a whopping 86% of indigenous over the age of 15 stopped studying after high school. It means they stopped studying after the age of 16. That's like coming out of grade 10. And in Taiwan, many degree holders already work low-wage, low-skilled jobs. I can't imagine how hard it is for an indigenous who are already looked down upon to find a job having nothing to show for. Upon researching, I stumbled upon an online thread where an indigenous had this to say: "It doesn't matter who is in charge, you'll be forgotten anyway." This sums up perfectly the indigenous sentiment. Taiwan's late decision to finally give a about the indigenous, in my view, seems extremely self-serving and pretentious at best. It's like having a two-faced friend that softens up only and only when they need you This all sounds like an endless cycle. To have the natives used yet again for selfish gain. I actually took a lot of time looking into this story. I must clarify, I'm not a subject expert on this matter. This is one extremely complex issue in Taiwan, and I want to say for legal purposes that this whole video is purely entertainment. I may be wrong or misrepresenting, and I welcome any subject expert on the matter to talk about this. Be sure to subscribe because there will be a lot more videos on Taiwan coming soon.